A big fight starts when a rich woman calls police on a homeless woman. But when their lives cross paths in a surprising way, an amazing twist changes everything forever. What incredible things happened that day to bring these two very different people together? Before we dive into this heartwarming story of change, comment below where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this touching tale, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Margaret Sterling walked quickly through Riverside Park, wearing her expensive workout clothes that looked perfect in the morning light. At 42, she acted like someone who always got what she wanted, her red hair styled perfectly even though she was supposed to be exercising. Her well-done nails held an expensive water bottle as she looked around what she thought was her own special place. Margaret didn't know that what she would do that morning would start a chain of events that would change everything she thought about herself and her neighborhood. Walking around the corner near the playground, Margaret's sharp green eyes saw something she didn't like. There, on the special bench made for local heroes, sat a woman with old shopping bags around her. The woman's rough hands held a thermos, her gray hair mostly hidden under an old baseball cap. Margaret's face showed anger and disgust. This was her safe place, her escape from all the problems she felt were coming into her perfect neighborhood. This homeless woman was ruining the peaceful feeling just by being there. "Excuse me," Margaret said coldly, her voice sharp and mean. "You can't stay here. This is a family park, not some place for homeless people." The woman looked up slowly, showing tired brown eyes behind old glasses. "I'm sorry, miss. I was just resting. I'll pack up my things." But Margaret wasn't happy with just that answer. Something dark came up inside her, memories of when she didn't have much money, times when she felt helpless. Instead of feeling sorry for the woman, these memories only made her more angry. "You better leave quickly," she said harshly. "People like you make this place dangerous for good families." The woman's shoulders dropped at these mean words, but she didn't argue back. She'd heard this kind of talk many times before. As the woman slowly started collecting her things, Margaret took out her phone, typing fast as she called for help. "Yes, I need to report a homeless person in Riverside Park," she said, making her voice sound scared even though she wasn't. "There's a homeless person here acting mean. I don't feel safe. Please send someone right now." Margaret didn't notice the jogger who had stopped to watch what was happening, or the dog walker shaking her head sadly. Linda Martinez, 54, heard Margaret's fake report feeling tired and sad. 20 years in the army had taught her about unfairness. But coming home to find no job and no place to live had been her hardest lesson. PTSD from her time fighting overseas made it very hard to live normal life again. As Margaret continued her dramatic performance, embellishing her story with each word, Linda's thoughts drifted to better times. She remembered the brotherhood among fellow soldiers, the clear sense of purpose that military service provided. But those memories were shadowed by the trauma she'd witnessed and the friends she'd lost in combat. Margaret remained oblivious that her actions would soon set in motion events that would force her to confront her deepest assumptions about worth and community. The approaching sirens broke Linda's reverie. She sighed deeply, recognizing the familiar routine ahead, the suspicious questioning, the presumption of guilt based solely on her appearance and circumstances. 2 patrol cars arrived at the park entrance as Margaret's face brightened with vindictive satisfaction. She adjusted her designer jacket and prepared to play the frightened victim. Officer James Chun approached first, his partner Officer Maria Santos beside him. With 12 years of police experience, Chun had responded to numerous frivolous calls, and something about this situation felt off. "Good morning, ma'am," Officer Chun said professionally but cautiously. "I understand you reported a threatening individual?" Margaret launched into her rehearsed narrative, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "Yes, officer. This person was camping on the bench, and when I politely asked her to leave, she became hostile. I feared for my safety." Officer Chun turned his attention to Linda, who remained seated with her hands visible. Something in her posture, a certain dignity despite her circumstances, caught his attention. "Ma'am, may I have your name?" Officer Chun asked, his tone noticeably gentler than when addressing Margaret. "Linda Martinez, sir," she replied steadily. "I meant no trouble. I'll be on my way. As Linda spoke, Officer Chun detected something familiar in her bearing. A military discipline he recognized from his own service background. Ms. Martinez, if you don't mind my asking, did you serve our country? Linda's eyes met the officer's, surprise flickering across her weathered features. Yes, sir. 20 years Army. 3 deployments overseas. Officer Chun nodded respectfully. Thank you for your service, Ms. Martinez. I served as well Navy, 2 tours in the Middle East. Margaret, who had been watching this exchange with growing irritation, suddenly interrupted. Excuse me, but what does any of this matter? This person is trespassing and making the park unsafe. I demand you remove her immediately. Officer Chun turned back to Margaret, his expression cooling. Ma'am, Ms. Martinez hasn't committed any crime. Homelessness is not illegal, and she has every right to use this public park. Margaret's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. This wasn't proceeding as planned. She pulled out her phone to begin recording. This is unbelievable. I'll be reporting this to your supervisors. You're refusing to protect tax-paying citizens from vagrants. As Margaret's voice escalated, drawing attention from other park visitors, Officer Santos intervened. Ma'am, please lower your voice. We're handling this situation appropriately. Meanwhile, Officer Chun had moved closer to Linda, speaking quietly. Ms. Martinez, have you connected with the VA? There are programs specifically for veterans facing housing challenges. Linda nodded wearily. I've tried, sir, but the waiting lists are extensive, and the paperwork is overwhelming. Sometimes my PTSD makes it difficult to navigate the system. Officer Chen's expression softened with understanding. He reached into his wallet and produced a business card. I know someone at the Veterans Resource Center, Elena Rodriguez. She's excellent at cutting through bureaucratic obstacles. Call her and mention that James Chun referred you. As this conversation unfolded, Margaret's frustration reached a boiling point. She stormed over, phone held high, still recording. This is completely unacceptable. I'm a taxpayer with rights. This vagrant is threatening our community, and you're treating her like she belongs here. Officer Santos stepped between Margaret and the others. Ma'am, I need you to step back. You're unnecessarily escalating this situation. But Margaret was beyond reason. Months of accumulated fear, frustration, and prejudice erupted in a stream of venomous words. You people are all the same, protecting criminals and freeloaders while hardworking citizens suffer. I'll have both your jobs for this. As Margaret's tirade continued, she remained unaware that several bystanders were recording her outburst on their phones. Her contorted face and hateful words were being captured for the world to see. Officer Chun, having concluded his conversation with Linda, addressed Margaret one final time. Ma'am, I'm asking you to calm down. You called us here under false pretenses, claiming Ms. Martinez was threatening when she clearly was not. Filing false reports is a serious offense. Margaret's eyes widened in disbelief. This couldn't be happening. She was the victim, the one protecting her community. How could these officers not see that? As the confrontation reached its climax, none of the participants realized this incident would soon explode across social media, igniting a firestorm of controversy and forcing a community to examine its hidden biases. Margaret stormed away from the scene, clutching her phone tightly. She was already composing her social media post, certain that once she shared her version of events, everyone would rally to support her. As she departed, Officer Chun turned back to Linda. Ms. Martinez, do you have somewhere safe to go? I'd feel better knowing you have a secure place to stay. Linda nodded slowly. There's a shelter downtown. It's not ideal, but they know me there. Officer Chun reached into his wallet again, pulling out a $20 bill. For transportation and perhaps a meal. And don't forget to call that number I gave you. Linda's eyes filled with unexpected tears. It had been so long since anyone had shown her such kindness. Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say. As Linda gathered her belongings and left the park, neither she nor Officer Chun could have predicted how their lives would soon become intertwined. That evening, Margaret sat at her kitchen island, wine glass in hand, furiously typing her account of the morning's events on Facebook. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, each word dripping with self-righteousness and indignation. Absolutely disgusted by the state of our community today. This morning I encountered a dangerous vagrant in our beautiful riverside park. When I called police for help, they refused to do their jobs. Is this what we pay taxes for, to be left vulnerable to criminals and derelicts? We must reclaim our parks and streets. She attached the video she had recorded, carefully edited to show only portions supporting her narrative. With a satisfied smirk, she hit publish and waited for the supportive comments to pour in. But Margaret had severely miscalculated. Within hours, her post had indeed gone viral, but not as she'd anticipated. Other videos of the incident, taken by witnesses, began surfacing online. These unedited versions painted a completely different picture. One of a privileged woman harassing a homeless veteran and making false accusations to police. The backlash was swift and brutal. Margaret's Facebook page was flooded with angry comments. People she considered friends publicly distanced themselves. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, each one bringing fresh criticism and outrage. As the night progressed, Margaret's smug confidence began cracking. She had always viewed herself as a community pillar, someone who stood for what was right. But now, faced with harsh public scrutiny, she was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Maybe she wasn't the hero in this story. Meanwhile, across town in a crowded homeless shelter, Linda lay on a narrow cot, Officer Chen's business card clutched in her hand. As she drifted towards sleep, she wondered if perhaps tomorrow might bring positive change to her circumstances. Neither Margaret nor Linda realized their paths would cross again in ways they could never have imagined. The events set in motion that morning in Riverside Park were far from over, and the greatest challenges and opportunities for growth were yet to come. Dawn broke over the city as Margaret awoke to a dramatically altered world. Her phone, which she had finally silenced in the early morning hours, was filled with missed calls, text messages, and countless social media notifications. With growing dread, she began scrolling through them. Local news had picked up the story. Her face was displayed across screens alongside headlines like "Local Woman Harasses Homeless Veteran" and "Privilege and Prejudice in the Park." Community outraged. Margaret felt nauseous watching clips of herself, her face twisted with anger, spouting words she now deeply regretted. As she prepared for work, Margaret's phone rang. Her supervisor's name appeared on the screen. "Margaret," he said, his voice tight with barely contained anger. "We need to talk. Come to my office immediately upon arrival." The drive to work was a blur of anxiety and shame. Margaret, typically so confident and self-assured, felt exposed and vulnerable. Walking through the office, she could feel colleagues staring, could hear whispers that ceased as she passed. In her supervisor's office, reality came crashing down. "Margaret," he said, his disappointment evident, "your actions have brought significant negative attention to our company. We pride ourselves on being an inclusive workplace, and your behavior directly contradicts our values. I'm afraid we have to terminate your employment." Margaret left the building in shock, a cardboard box of belongings pressed against her chest. In 24 hours, her entire world had been upended. Sitting in her car in the parking lot, tears streaming down her face, Margaret was forced to confront the consequences of her actions in a way she never had before. Across town, Linda's day was taking a very different direction. She had called the number Officer Chun provided and, to her amazement, secured an appointment that very morning. Walking into the Veterans Resource Center, she was warmly greeted by Elena Rodriguez, the woman Officer Chun had mentioned. "Linda Martinez," Elena said, extending her hand. "James told me about you. Let's see what we can do to get you back on your feet." Over the following hours, Linda found herself swept up in a whirlwind of activity. Elena helped her navigate complex paperwork for housing assistance, connected her with a PTSD support group, and even found her a spot in a job training program. Leaving the center that afternoon, Linda felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The path ahead remained long and challenging, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a fighting chance. Little did Linda know that her path would soon intersect again with the woman who had caused her so much trouble just one day earlier. The intertwining of their stories was far from over, and the most unexpected developments were yet to come. A week had passed since the park incident, and Margaret's life had become virtually unrecognizable. She had lost her job, many friends had severed ties, and she could barely leave home without feeling the weight of judgmental stares from neighbors. Sitting at her kitchen table, scrolling through job listings on her laptop, Margaret felt profound loneliness and regret. The anger that had fueled her park actions had long since faded, replaced by overwhelming shame and a desperate desire to make amends. With a heavy sigh, Margaret closed her laptop and decided to take a walk. She needed to clear her head, to escape the suffocating atmosphere of her home. Without conscious thought, her feet carried her to Riverside Park. As she approached the entrance, Margaret hesitated. This was where everything had started. Part of her wanted to retreat, to hide from the world that now seemed so hostile. But something pushed her forward, a need to confront her mistakes head-on. The park was quiet in the late afternoon light. As Margaret walked the familiar paths, she found herself approaching the memorial bench where she had encountered Linda. To her surprise, Linda was there again, sitting quietly and gazing out over the pond. Margaret's heart raced. Her first instinct was to flee, but she fought against it. Taking a deep breath, she approached the bench. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice completely different from the harsh tones she had used a week ago. "Ms. Martinez?" Linda looked up, her eyes widening in recognition. She tensed visibly, clearly uncomfortable with Margaret's presence. "I owe you an apology," Margaret continued, her voice trembling slightly. "What I did last week was inexcusable. I treated you horribly, and I'm truly sorry." Linda regarded her silently for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Margaret stood there, feeling exposed and vulnerable, waiting for a response that seemed like it might never come. Finally, Linda spoke, her voice low and measured. "Why are you really here, ma'am? Is it because you're genuinely sorry, or because your life has fallen apart?" Margaret flinched at her words but couldn't deny their truth. She slowly sat down on the far end of the bench, leaving considerable space between them. "You're right to question my motives," she admitted. "The truth is, I'm here for both reasons. Yes, my life has been turned upside down, and yes, that's part of why I'm here. But it's also forced me to examine myself, my actions and beliefs. And I don't like what I see." Linda listened quietly, her gaze fixed on the pond before them. Margaret continued, words pouring out in a rush. "I've spent so much of my life judging others, thinking I was superior to everyone else. But this past week has shown me how wrong I was. I've lost my job, my friends, but more importantly, I've lost self-respect. I know an apology doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know that I regret what I did and I'm trying to become better." As Margaret finished speaking, she realized tears were streaming down her face. She wiped them away hastily, embarrassed by her emotional display. Linda remained silent for what felt like an eternity. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "I appreciate your apology, ma'am, but you're right. It doesn't fix anything. Words are easy. It's actions that matter." Margaret nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "I understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it." As she stood to leave, Linda's voice stopped her. "Mrs. Margaret Sterling," Margaret supplied. Linda nodded. "Mrs. Sterling, I can't say I forgive you, not yet. But I believe in second chances. The fact that you're here, that you're trying to make amends, that counts for something." Margaret felt a glimmer of hope at her words. "Thank you, Ms. Martinez. I promise I'm going to do better." As Margaret walked away, she felt a complex mix of emotions. Shame for her past actions, relief at having taken the first step toward making amends, and determination to follow through on her promise to improve. Little did Margaret know, this conversation was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge her in ways she never expected and lead to the most unlikely friendship. Over the following weeks, Margaret threw herself into volunteer work, desperate to make a positive impact on her community. She started at a local food bank, sorting donations and serving meals to those in need. The work was demanding and often thankless, but Margaret found a sense of purpose in it that she had never experienced in her corporate job. One afternoon, as Margaret was cleaning tables after the lunch service, she looked up to see a familiar face entering the food bank. It was Linda, accompanied by Elena Rodriguez from the Veterans Resource Center. Margaret froze, unsure how to react. Elena spotted her and waved her over. "Margaret, right? I've heard about you. Come meet Linda properly." Margaret approached nervously, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hello, Ms. Martinez. It's good to see you again." Linda nodded, a hint of surprise in her expression. "Mrs. Sterling, Elena tells me you've been volunteering here for several weeks now." "Yes," Margaret replied, surprised by the lack of hostility in Linda's tone. "I'm trying to give back to the community, to make up for my past behavior." Elena looked between them, sensing their history. "Well, Linda here has been making excellent progress. She's in transitional housing now and starting a job training course next week. We thought she might want to give back a little too. So we're here to explore volunteer opportunities." Margaret's face brightened. "That's wonderful news, Ms. Martinez. I'm so glad things are improving for you." Linda's expression softened slightly. "Thank you. It's been a long journey, but I'm getting there." As Elena went to speak with the volunteer coordinator, Margaret and Linda found themselves alone. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Margaret spoke. "Ms. Martinez, I know I've said this before, but I truly am sorry for how I treated you. I was wrong, and I'm working every day to become a better person." Linda studied her for a moment before responding. "I can see that, Mrs. Sterling. Takes courage to admit when you're wrong and to try to change. I respect that." Margaret felt a weight lift from her shoulders at her words. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you." As Elena returned with information about volunteer opportunities, Margaret had an idea. "Ms. Martinez, if you're interested, I could show you around here. It can be overwhelming at first, but it's really rewarding work." Linda hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'd appreciate that, Mrs. Sterling. Thank you." And so began an unlikely partnership. Over the next few weeks, Margaret and Linda worked side by side at the food bank. At first, their interactions were stilted and awkward, both hyper-aware of their past conflict. But as time passed, they found a rhythm in their work, and a cautious friendship began to form. Margaret learned about Linda's experiences in the military, the struggles she faced upon returning home, and the challenges of living on the streets. Linda, in turn, saw a different side of Margaret, one that was humble, hardworking, and genuinely committed to change. One evening, as they were closing up the kitchen, Linda turned to Margaret. "You know, Mrs. Sterling, when I first met you in that park, I never would have imagined we'd end up here." Margaret chuckled softly. "Me neither, Ms. Martinez. And please, call me Margaret." Linda smiled. "Then I insist you call me Linda." As they walked out into the cool evening air, Margaret felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. She knew she still had a long way to go, that one good deed didn't erase a lifetime of prejudice, but she was on the right path. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly proud of herself. Little did Margaret and Linda know, their budding friendship was about to face its greatest test yet. The coming weeks would challenge them both in ways they never expected, forcing them to confront their deepest fears and prejudices. But through it all, they would discover the transformative power of empathy, forgiveness, and second chances. As summer turned to fall, Margaret and Linda's unlikely friendship continued to grow. They volunteered together regularly at the food bank and occasionally met for coffee to chat about their lives. Margaret had found a new job, though at a much lower position than her previous one, and was slowly rebuilding her life. Linda was excelling in her job training program and had moved into more permanent housing. One crisp October morning, Margaret arrived at the park for her usual morning walk. As she approached the bench where she had first encountered Linda, she was surprised to see her sitting there, her head in her hands. "Linda," she called out, concern evident in her voice. "Is everything all right?" Linda looked up, and Margaret was shocked to see tears in her eyes. "Margaret," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "I don't know what to do." Margaret sat down beside her, all thoughts of her walk forgotten. "What's happened?" Linda took a deep breath before speaking. "I got a call from my son last night. My ex-husband is sick cancer. It's advanced, and he doesn't have much time left." She paused, swallowing hard. "My son asked if I could come home to help out and to say goodbye." Margaret felt her heart ache for her friend. "Oh, Linda, I'm so sorry. Of course you should go." Linda shook her head, frustration evident in her gesture. "It's not that simple. They're in Colorado. I can't afford the trip, and even if I could, Margaret, I haven't seen my family in years. Not since." She trailed off, but Margaret understood. Not since she had become homeless. Without hesitation, Margaret placed her hand on Linda's arm. "Linda, listen to me. You need to be with your family right now. We'll figure out the rest." Over the next few days, Margaret threw herself into helping Linda prepare for her trip. She reached out to her contacts, managing to secure a discounted plane ticket. She helped Linda navigate the process of taking leave from her job training program, assuring her that her spot would be waiting when she returned. The morning of Linda's flight, Margaret drove her to the airport. As they stood at the security checkpoint, Linda turned to her, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Margaret, I don't know how to thank you for all of this," she said softly. Margaret shook her head, smiling. "You don't need to thank me, Linda. This is what friends do for each other." As Linda disappeared into the security line, Margaret felt a mix of emotions wash over her. Pride in how far they had both come, worry for Linda and her family, and a strange sense of loss at the thought of not seeing her for several weeks. Little did Margaret know, Linda's trip would set in motion a series of events that would test their friendship in ways they never could have anticipated. In the weeks that followed, Margaret threw herself into her volunteer work, trying to fill the void left by Linda's absence. She found herself missing their conversations, the easy camaraderie they had developed. She worried about how Linda was coping with her ex-husband's illness and the reunion with her estranged family. One evening, as Margaret was leaving the food bank, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "Did you hear about that homeless vet who scammed that lady?" One volunteer was saying to another. Apparently she made up some sob story about a sick ex-husband to get her to pay for a trip to Colorado. Now she's disappeared with the money. Margaret felt her heart drop. She wanted to believe it wasn't true, that they couldn't be talking about Linda, but the details matched too closely for comfort. Over the next few days, Margaret tried repeatedly to reach Linda, but her calls went straight to voicemail. She contacted Elena at the Veterans Resource Center, only to learn that Linda hadn't been in touch with them either. Doubt began to creep into Margaret's mind. Had she been fooled? Had her desire to make amends blinded her to the truth? As the days turned into weeks with no word from Linda, Margaret found herself struggling with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to believe in Linda, in the friendship they had built, but another part, the part that had been shaped by years of prejudice and mistrust, whispered that she had been naive, that Linda had taken advantage of her guilt. The situation came to a head when a local news station picked up the story. They ran a piece about a con artist preying on the guilty consciences of well-meaning citizens, featuring an interview with a woman who claimed to have been scammed by Linda. Margaret watched the broadcast with growing horror. The woman's story was eerily similar to her own. She had met Linda in a park, felt guilty about her initial prejudice, and had been persuaded to help her financially. Now, like Margaret, she hadn't heard from her in weeks. As the anchor asked viewers to come forward with any information about Linda's whereabouts, Margaret felt her world crumbling around her. Had everything, the friendship, the personal growth, the sense of redemption, been a lie? With a heavy heart, Margaret picked up her phone and dialed the number for the news station. As much as it pained her, she felt she had a responsibility to share what she knew. But just as she was about to hit the call button, her phone lit up with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar, with a Colorado area code. With trembling fingers, Margaret answered. "Hello, Margaret. The voice on the other end was familiar but strained. "It's Linda. I'm so sorry I haven't been in touch. Things have been complicated." Margaret felt a wave of relief wash over her, quickly followed by a surge of anger and confusion. "Linda, where have you been? Do you have any idea what's been happening here?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Linda spoke again, her voice was heavy with exhaustion and emotion. "Margaret, I can explain everything, but I need your help. Can you come to Colorado?" Margaret's mind reeled. Part of her wanted to refuse, to protect herself from potentially being hurt again. But another part, the part that had grown and changed over the past months, urged her to listen, to give Linda a chance to explain. "All right, Linda," she said finally. "I'll come. But when I get there, you better have one hell of an explanation." As Margaret hung up the phone, she knew she was at a crossroads. Her decision to go to Colorado could either validate her newfound faith in humanity or confirm her worst fears about being manipulated. Either way, she knew that the trip would change everything. What Margaret didn't realize was that her journey to Colorado would not only resolve the mystery of Linda's disappearance, but would also force her to confront the deepest roots of her own prejudices and fears. The true test of their friendship, and of Margaret's personal growth, was yet to come. Margaret's mind was a whirlwind of emotions as she boarded the plane to Colorado. Doubt, hope, anger, and concern battled for dominance as she replayed her brief conversation with Linda over and over in her head. The flight seemed interminable, each minute stretching out as Margaret's anxiety grew. Finally, the plane touched down in Denver. As Margaret made her way through the bustling airport, she spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Linda stood near the exit, looking haggard and worn. When their eyes met, a complex mix of emotions passed between them. "Margaret," Linda said, her voice rough with fatigue. "Thank you for coming. I know I have a lot of explaining to do." Margaret nodded, her expression guarded. "Yes, you do. Let's go somewhere we can talk." They made their way to a small cafe near the airport. As they settled into a quiet corner booth, Margaret couldn't help but notice how much older Linda looked, as if she had aged years in the weeks since Margaret had last seen her. "All right, Linda," Margaret said, her voice firm but not unkind. "What's going on? Do you have any idea what people are saying back home?" Linda's shoulders slumped as she nodded. "I've heard, Margaret. I swear to you, none of it is true. I haven't scammed anyone. The situation here, it's been more complicated than I could have imagined." Over the next hour, Linda poured out the whole story. Her ex-husband's condition had been worse than expected. He had no insurance and the medical bills were astronomical. Linda's son, struggling to cope with his father's illness and the sudden reappearance of the mother he barely knew, had lashed out in anger and confusion. "I wanted to call you to explain," Linda said, her eyes pleading for understanding. "But everything was happening so fast. And then my phone was stolen at the hospital, and I couldn't remember your number." As Linda spoke, Margaret felt her anger and doubt slowly melting away, replaced by deep empathy. She reached across the table, taking Linda's hand in hers. "Oh, Linda," she said softly, "I'm so sorry you've been going through all this alone. But why didn't you reach out to Elena or someone else for help?" Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I was ashamed," she admitted. "I felt like I was failing all over again, like I couldn't even handle this one thing on my own. And then, when I heard about the rumors back home, I was afraid no one would believe me." Margaret felt a pang of guilt, remembering her own moments of doubt. "I understand," she said. "But Linda, you're not alone. Not anymore. Now tell me how I can help." Over the next few days, Margaret threw herself into helping Linda navigate the complex web of medical bills, insurance claims, and family dynamics. She used her professional skills to organize fundraisers, negotiate with the hospital, and even mediate conversations between Linda and her son. As they worked together, Margaret found herself in awe of Linda's resilience and compassion. Despite everything she had been through, she remained focused on being there for her ex-husband and rebuilding her relationship with her son. One evening, as they sat in the hospital waiting room during a particularly long night, Linda turned to Margaret with a look of wonder. "You know," she said softly, "a few months ago, I never would have imagined that the woman who called the cops on me in the park would end up being my strongest supporter. Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it? Margaret felt tears welling up in her eyes. Linda, I can never apologize enough for how I treated you that day, but I'm grateful for the chance to make it right, to be a true friend. As they sat there in the sterile hospital hallway, Margaret realized how far they had both come, she from a place of prejudice and entitlement to one of empathy and genuine care, and Linda from isolation and despair to having a support system she could rely on. Their journey was far from over. Linda's ex-husband was still gravely ill, and there were many challenges ahead. But as they sat there together, Margaret knew that whatever came next, they would face it as friends, united by a bond forged through adversity and mutual growth. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital visits, legal consultations, and emotional conversations. Margaret extended her stay in Colorado, using her vacation days to support Linda and her family. She watched with pride as Linda reconnected with her son, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been broken years ago. One afternoon, as they were leaving the hospital after a particularly difficult day, Linda's son David pulled Margaret aside. "I want to thank you," David said, his voice thick with emotion, "for being here for my mom, for all of us. I didn't trust her when she first came back, but seeing how you've stood by her, it's helped me see the woman she's become." Margaret felt a lump in her throat. "Your mother is an incredible woman, David. I'm just glad I got the chance to know her, to make up for my past mistakes." As the days passed, Linda's ex-husband's condition stabilized enough for him to be moved to a hospice facility. The atmosphere was heavy with the knowledge that their time together was limited, but there was also a sense of peace, of wounds being healed and forgiveness being offered. On their last night in Colorado before flying back home, Margaret and Linda took a walk through downtown Denver. The city lights twinkled around them as they reflected on their journey. "Margaret," Linda said, stopping to face her, "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You've helped me reconnect with my family, face my past, and find strength I didn't know I had." Margaret shook her head, smiling through tears. "Linda, you don't need to thank me. You've given me so much more. You've taught me about resilience, forgiveness, and the power of second chances. Our friendship has changed my life." As they stood there, the cool mountain air around them, both Margaret and Linda reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. From a confrontation in a park sparked by prejudice and fear to a deep friendship built on understanding and mutual respect. The flight home was filled with a mixture of emotions. Sadness at leaving Linda's family, concern for her ex-husband's declining health, but also hope for the future and the knowledge that they had each other's support. As they landed and made their way through the airport, Margaret suddenly remembered the news story that had aired about Linda. "Oh no," she gasped. "Linda, what are we going to do about the rumors? People think you're a con artist." Linda squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We'll face it together, Margaret. The truth is on our side." Over the next few days, Margaret and Linda worked tirelessly to clear Linda's name. They reached out to the news station that had run the story, providing evidence of Linda's whereabouts and the real reason for her extended absence. They spoke with the Veterans Resource Center, explaining the situation and enlisting their help in spreading the truth. It wasn't easy. Some people were quick to believe the worst, clinging to their prejudices and suspicions. But slowly, as the real story came to light, the tide of public opinion began to turn. The woman who had claimed to be scammed by Linda came forward to admit that she had jumped to conclusions, apologizing for her role in spreading false information. The news station ran a follow-up story, highlighting Linda's dedication to her family and Margaret's unwavering support. As the truth spread, Margaret and Linda found themselves at the center of a different kind of attention. People were touched by their story of unlikely friendship and personal growth. They were invited to speak at community events, sharing their experiences and the lessons they had learned about overcoming prejudice and the power of second chances. One evening, as they left a speaking engagement at a local church, an elderly woman approached them, tears in her eyes. "Your story," she said, clasping their hands. "It's given me hope. Hope that people can change, that we can overcome our differences and find common ground." Thank you for sharing it with us. Margaret and Linda exchanged a glance, both feeling the weight of the impact their journey had made. They had started as strangers divided by prejudice and misunderstanding. Now they stood side by side, united in their mission to spread a message of empathy, forgiveness, and the transformative power of friendship. As they walked home that night, Margaret turned to Linda. You know, when I called the police on you that day in the park, I thought I was protecting my community. I never could have imagined that you would end up being the one to teach me what community really means. Linda nodded, a soft smile on her face. And I never thought the woman who saw me as a threat would become my closest friend and strongest advocate. Life has a funny way of working out sometimes. Their story didn't end there, of course. Life continued to throw challenges their way. Linda's ex-husband passed away a few months later, and Margaret was there to support her and David through their grief. Together, they established a foundation in his memory, dedicated to helping homeless veterans reintegrate into society. Margaret continued her journey of personal growth, using her experiences to become an advocate for social justice and community outreach. Linda, with Margaret's encouragement, pursued her dream of becoming a counselor for veterans struggling with PTSD and homelessness. Their friendship remained a cornerstone in both their lives, a constant reminder of the power of looking beyond first impressions and the importance of giving people second chances. Years later, as they sat on that same park bench where their story had begun, Margaret and Linda reflected on how far they had come. The park around them had changed, as had they, but the bench remained the same, a symbol of their journey. You know, Linda, Margaret said, her voice soft with emotion, I used to think this bench was mine, that I had some sort of claim to it. Now I realize it belongs to everyone, just like this park, just like our community. We're all in this together. Linda nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. And that's the most important lesson of all, isn't it? That we're all human, all deserving of kindness and understanding, no matter where we come from or what we look like. And so, dear viewers, as we come to the end of this incredible journey, we're left with a powerful message. It's a reminder that change is possible, that redemption is within reach, and that the bonds of friendship can transcend even the deepest divides. If you were in Margaret's position, would you have found the courage to apologize and make amends? Or if you were Linda, could you have forgiven someone who initially treated you so poorly? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your perspective. Thank you for joining us on this transformative journey. If this story touched your heart as much as it did ours, I've handpicked another inspiring tale that I know you'll love. Please don't miss it. Click here to watch it now.